With that, we're going to move to our general business, item J1, receiving a report on the status of the city's roadway pavement condition, or also known as PCI. The staff report, I'm going to call on our Public Works Director, Nick Nguyen, to open the item. Welcome again, Nick.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good evening, Mr. Mayor and council members. It is our privilege tonight to provide an update on the general health of the city's pavement network. The City of Novato is responsible for maintaining approximately 320 lane miles of road. For perspective, just imagine for a moment, this is equivalent to a one-lane highway stretching from here to past the city of Santa Barbara. It takes the proverbial village to manage this pavement network, from the actions taken by this esteemed council to residents such as members of the Complete Streets and Pathway Oversight Committee, and to the city staff and contractors who help craft capital maintenance solutions. It also requires a significant amount of funding, technology, and regional support. Our funding comes from a limited and constrained source, which is the state gas tax. This restricted revenue is projected to be relatively flat in the future, if not declining due to new vehicle efficiency mandates. One of the bright spots in this narrative is the technology and regional support we receive from the Transportation Authority Marin, also known as TAM, and the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, also known as MTC, who provide us with additional funding opportunities. MTC also provides the city with a key management tool, a pavement management program called Street Saver. Not only is the use of a pavement management decision support program best practice, it is also mandatory if the city is to access federal funds. For these reasons, the city has utilized a pavement management program for many years to catalog our road inventory and condition, forecast budgets, and establish our preliminary 5-year annual street rehabilitation list. Our pavement management program is updated every 2 years. We last updated the program in 2023, and the consultant who helped with the update is here tonight to present the results of the findings. From NCE Consulting, we have Margot Yap. We are fortunate to have Margot on our team, as she is a legend, not to overstate, in the pavement engineering industry, and has been at the forefront of pavement management for over 20 years. At the conclusion of our consultant's presentation, our associate engineer Gosha Woodfin and I, as well as Margot and her team, will be available for any question. With that, I would like to turn it over to Margot to present the update.
Welcome.
Good evening, Mayor, Mr. Mayor, and council members. So, as Nick said, I'm here to talk a little bit about the city streets, and I like to think of it as a kind of a state of the streets summary for all of you. So let me just get the clicker. So as Nick mentioned, you've got a pretty substantial street network here. There's about 152 center line miles, a little bit over 327 lane miles, and these are all numbers, but I don't want you to focus on those numbers. What I want you to focus on is this last item down here on the slide, which is what is the value of the street network that you have? It conservatively is about $277 million today, and that's quite a large chunk for a city of the size of Novato. So the point of my presentation here really is to talk about the value of a publicly owned asset and what we need to do to maintain it and to keep it in good shape. And so I'm going to present you with lots of numbers tonight, hopefully to help inform you in any policy decisions that you're going to be making. So to do a quick comparison and benchmark Novato with some of the other cities in Marin, you can see that in general, we have about 2.9 miles per person or per capita in Marin, in Novato, and it ranges, it's pretty much in the average. I think San Anselmo's a little bit higher, but by and large, it's sort of more or less the same as some of the other cities. And let's keep those numbers in mind, and then let's go to something called the PCI, and this is the Pavement Condition Index. And very simply, it's a scale from 0 to 100, with 100 being best roads and 0 being the worst or failed street. And where Novato fails, on average, it's at 66. And this number 66 is good and bad news. right? The good part of it is if you look at the pie chart on the right-hand side, about 40% of your roads are in pretty good shape. That's really good news. About half are in fair shape. And the not so good news is you've got about 12% that's poor or failed. So that's the part that we try to focus on to see what we can do to rehabilitate this. And many council members and the public asks me this question is, what is a good number to be at? Is 66 a good number? And I can tell you, I'm a pavement engineer, and I'll use the analogy of my daughter who is currently in college. And if she were to come home when she was in high school and say, well, you know, I got a 66 in my math test, I can have two responses as a parent. One, I can say, well, maybe that's not too bad. I mean, I was never a very good math student, even though I am an engineer. Another parent might say, you know what, you got to work a little bit harder if you want to get to college. So that decision is before you today. What you consider good or not is your decision. It's a policy decision. What I can tell you, however, are the financial implications of what 66 means in terms of the different levels and thresholds we want to approach. So if we were to take a look at some of these photos, just kind of to calibrate yourself and what these numbers mean, here's a picture of a 91, a street with a PCF 91, and it's pretty good. I mean, it's good shape. There's no cracks in it. There's no potholes. It's smooth. You know, drivers probably love it. The bikers like it. Skateboarders probably go down the street as well. We won't do anything to the street. If we don't do anything and we let it deteriorate a little bit further, let's say 3, 4, 5 years, you can see on this picture here, some cracks begin to develop. And so now we're about the PCF 75, and typically what we would recommend is some sort of a microsurfacing. You got to do something as preventive maintenance to protect the street. But if we choose not to do anything and continue to let it deteriorate, you can see the cracks get a little bit wider. And then after a winter, like the last couple of winters, you see vegetation growing in those cracks, which is a really bad sign for a pavement engineer, because what that means is that the roots are going all the way down to the bottom of the section, and it's now going to begin to deteriorate a little bit faster. So this is actually what we would consider moderate to high severity cracking. We can still do a fairly inexpensive treatment, but it's going to start getting worse from here. Now, this particular picture, you can see there's actually a pattern to those cracks. We call it alligator or fatigue cracking, and it's a structural failure. And what I mean by that is that these cracks, even though they don't look really big and they extend all the way down to the bottom of the pavement, and essentially the asphalt has failed. So a repair for that would be, in this case, removing it, milling it off a couple of inches, and replacing it with a hot mix asphalt overlay. And this is a PCA about 41. So where the city is you know, a little bit better than this number, but you do have streets that are around 40s. Remember, I said about 12%, and you also have streets with a PCI that look like this. And now you can see the potholes are beginning to form. At this point, we would have to consider reconstruction. Okay? So next question usually I get asked is, well, where does Novato stand in comparison with some of the other cities? And you can see we've assembled data from some of the surrounding neighbors you have here. Couple of points. There's some really good cities. Ross, average PCI of 80, you know, indisputably good. You also have Petaluma on the other end of the spectrum with an average of 44, and Novato is solidly in the middle. And coincidentally, it also happens, the statewide average for all 539 cities and counties in California is 65. So you're in the average. It's not great, but it's not bad. So let's take a look, though, at where you were in the past. And this chart shows that not that long ago, really only 13 years ago, you were at 72, average of 72. And what we have seen now is a slow, gentle deterioration, and we are now at 66. And now we're beginning to be a little bit more concerned. And the reason I'm concerned is because of this chart right here. If you look on the left-hand side, where 66 kind of is, and you draw it all the way, that little S-shaped curve is how pavements deteriorate. It's a slow, gentle deterioration in the beginning. It hits kind of a cliff. It drops very rapidly, and from then it fails fairly quickly. So where the average of 66 is, we're sort of on the edge of that cliff in Novato. I can come back in 3 or 4 years and maybe do a similar presentation, and the results could be quite significantly different than what it is today. So that's just kind of sharing my experience. Now, every part of this curve has a financial implication. So when we put in what kind of repairs we do, you can see that if you have a street that is in a green category, microsurfacing about 1050 square yard, and then it drops all the way down to $120, more than 10 times for surface reconstruction. So at every stage of this curve, those costs get higher and higher. And what we try to do is try to build on the preservation principle. And I'm going to show you a next couple of charts. So if you look at this chart here, if we have a street that's in good condition and we continue doing some microsurfacing and maintain it at $10.50 a square yard, what you're going to see is that residents will experience a higher level of service overall over its 20 to 25-year life, and you do save some money. Okay, that is the preservation policy that we would recommend. And this is very similar to the analogy of a car. I have a Toyota. It's a 2006 Toyota. It has lasted 200,000 miles, and hopefully it'll last a little bit more. And I have two choices again as a car owner. I can drive it off the lot and be a very faithful, every 5,000 miles, go get an oil change, every 15,000 miles, get a service interval maintenance, and do what I'm supposed to do and be diligent. Or I can drive the car, brand new car off the lot, and not do anything, drive it to the ground, and then go buy a new car. Intuitively, I think when you're faced with these two choices, you know what the most a cost-effective approach is. It is to maintain what we have. So it's very similar to streets. So this chart really shows the impact of trying to maintain it in using preventive maintenance. The other option, of course, is don't do anything, let the streets fail, then go out and replace it. And it's going to cost $120 a square yard. But it's not just the cost. As the road fails, your residents are going to experience a significantly lower level of service. You're going to get lots of complaints because of potholes. I'm sure Gosia is familiar with that. And so overall, it's not that great of a choice. So that's the kind of the message I want to leave behind is you do have good roads. 40% of your roads are in good shape right now. Keep them in good shape. Definitely, you need to squirrel away some money and try to address the rehabilitation and reconstruction, but don't ignore the good streets at the expense of the worst streets in town. And this is a difficult decision because I know you all get calls from your residents, and the calls are, I have the worst street in the city, why aren't you doing something about it? My neighbor's street is in better shape, you're doing something there, but you're not fixing mine. And it is a difficult question to answer, but from when you look at the funding priorities, you have to preserve your good streets. Otherwise, everything's going to get a lot worse. So we ran, at the request of the staff, various scenarios. Oh, I'm sorry. One term I'm going to be using in the next couple of slides is something called deferred maintenance. And really, just think of deferred maintenance as the unfunded backlog. It's all the repairs that we want to do, but we don't have the money to do it. And what we try to track is we want this number to be stable. We don't want it to grow over time, okay? So the next few slides will show those trends. So at the staff's request, we ran 4 scenarios. The first one is look at the current funding, which is about $3 million a year. And then the next question was, well, $3 million a year is not going to take us very far. How much would it cost to maintain it, improve it, or get to best management practices? So let me go through the slides instead of looking at these numbers. So here's the first slide. There's 2 pieces of information on this slide. The line represents the PCI, and we are currently at 66. And at $3 million a year, we're going to see a deterioration over 5 very short years to 61. We're dropping on average about a point a year. The bars at the bottom are kind of, if you think of an iceberg, I think of the bars as what's everything under the water line, because this is the huge financial implications. We currently have a deferred maintenance in the about 40-some million right now. In 5 years, it's going to grow by 50%. To $61 million. And we're assuming, I think, a 3% inflation rate is what we use in the analysis. Now, inflation, if God forbid, it hits back 5%, I mean, these numbers are going to be off the charts. But this is a very sobering number that I want to share. So even though the PCI doesn't seem to drop very much, that $61 million is of concern. The next chart, the city staff asked us to do as well, Margot, and Sharam and the whole team. How much do we need to stay where we are, to stabilize the existing street network, to live with some of the bad streets we have, but also the good streets, and to maintain the average at 66? It's going to cost, or you're going to need about $8 million at today's construction prices. But that also stabilizes, you'll notice, your unfunded backlog or your deferred maintenance in the low 40 million. So this is a pretty good status quo. If we want to try and achieve something better, to go back to where we were in 2013, which was an average PCI of 72, it's going to require almost $11 million a year. But at this point, you're also able now to chip away at your unfunded backlog and reduce it by half to about 20 million in 5 years. This is an ambitious goal, I think achievable, and it would get you back to where you were, like I said, 13 years ago. And then finally, if you really wanted to try and improve, and there's, like a Ross with a PCI of 80, if you wanted to get to that kind of a comparison, it would need about $14 million a year, and that would bring you up to 76, which is a pretty good number to be at. You notice that your unfunded backlog is almost down to 0, and then from that point on, you probably don't need to spend a huge amount of money to maintain it, because the majority of your roads are going to be in pretty good shape at that point. So these are sort of the 4 scenarios that we ran, and I think you have them all in your staff report. And so the next question really is, well, going from $3 million to 14 million is a big jump for us. What are some funding sources? And so we shared this information with staff. I mean, there are 3 buckets of money really for most public agencies. There's the federal bucket, the state bucket, and the local. There's some examples here. You're probably already getting some RSTP money, I would imagine, from the federal bucket. President Biden did pass a very significant EJA plan, infrastructure plan, which has given California overall billions of dollars for infrastructure. Novato might benefit from some of it. The state, of course, is primarily gas tax. There are other things, Cal Recycle grants, there's vehicle registration fees that you may get a portion of as well. And then, of course, local sources, and I've heard you already mention in this tonight's meeting about the local sales tax measure, which tends to be a very common source of funding, parcel tax, impact fees, all those are sources that other agencies and cities have used. And so with that, I'd like to open it up for any questions you might have.